Hello, everybody. Good evening and welcome to Seeds, Words that Feed the Future. Buonasera a tutti e benvenuti a Seeds, le parole che nutrono il futuro. Si tratta di una serie di eventi online organizzati dal CMCC, il Centro Euro-Mediterraneo per i cambiamenti climatici, e la Green Project Society. E l'evento è in inglese perché, come vedrete tra un attimo, abbiamo un ospite internazionale, quindi terremo la conversazione in inglese, ma naturalmente le interazioni con noi possono essere in inglese o in italiano, e quindi nel corso di questa chiacchierata che faremo questa sera con Eric Corey-Fried, a cui do il benvenuto. Welcome, Eric.
Hi, thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Eric Corey-Fried, che vi presento tra un istante. La conversazione con lui appunto sarà in inglese, ma potete interagire con noi nelle chat su YouTube o su Facebook tranquillamente in italiano, quindi andremo spostandoci tra queste due lingue. Allora, vi ricordo che questa serie di eventi è organizzata all'interno di un premio, il premio di comunicazione sul cambiamento climatico, quindi Climate Change Communication Award, intitolato a Rebecca Ballestra, un'artista che appunto vuole il CMCC e la Green Project Society ricordare attraverso appunto un premio, quindi un concorso per le migliori proposte sulle strategie di comunicazione sul cambiamento climatico, che potete inviare al sito che vedete indicato qui sotto sul banner cmccaward.eu entro il 30 giugno. Passo all'inglese e quindi welcome everybody for the people who are listening and staying with us from other countries outside of Italy or anywhere from other languages as well. So I would just want to remind you, SEEDS is a series of dialogues that focus on climate crisis and climate communication, and we're trying also to see how to improve the level and the quality and the effort of communication on the climate crisis. So this is being organized within the Climate Change Communication Award, Rebecca Ballestra, and everybody is welcome to present their ideas and projects for improving the communication of climate change by submitting your project to the address, the URL you are seeing in the banner here, cmccaward.eu, and the deadline for submission is June 30th. So our conversation tonight is with Eric Corey-Fried. He's an organic architect. He's a pioneer in the field of organic architecture, and I can say a visionary person, definitely. We will see with Eric what that translates concretely and what kind of ideas Eric is putting forward. He's been working a lot in the idea of biophilic and regenerative design in deep green buildings, but also doing a lot of education and communication about these themes. So helping people become aware of what's possible to do in order to improve the way we live in our cities and the way we build or decide to adjust our buildings. So Eric, I could go on and on your CV, but I'm sure people want to hear from you, so the floor is yours.
Grazie. Buonasera, everybody. My name is Eric, as you heard, and I'm an architect. I design buildings, and what we've discovered is that buildings are one of the primary causes of climate change. And so imagine devoting your life to something that you're very passionate about, only to discover that it's really causing your very destruction. And that's kind of how I feel as an architect, that we need to do something about it. By the way, if you want to follow me on social media or contact me, you can do that here. And I'm talking to you today from Portland, Oregon, in beautiful United States, right? Very green place. I also just put out a book on the circular economy, which is big in Europe and the EU, but not so big here in the United States. And for those of you that don't know, the circular economy is really a new framework for how we should design everything. If the traditional economy is a linear approach, what we call a take, make, waste approach, the circular economy really looks to bend some of those things to change from take, make, waste to harvest, make, and remake over and over and over. And this is what companies like Adidas and IKEA and Intel and Amazon and Patagonia have all been embracing in their design philosophy. And the reason that I wanted to write this book is because I really see this as the framework we need to look at this next chapter for us as humans. Because we've had a pretty crazy year, as you all know, and now we're seeing a light at the end of the tunnel and we're just coming out of it. So the real question is, well, what happens now? Where do we go from here? And that's what I want to talk to you about today, very, very quickly. What I've discovered is that most people, for lack of a better word, are stupid. Most people are kind of morons, and I'm a moron too. It's fine. But I don't know if we're going to be able to solve the problems that are facing us at the scale and the pace that we need to solve them when we have people that are not quite equipped to deal with this. Plus, our conversations around climate change have historically been pretty inept. We usually ask a celebrity what they think of climate change, and then nothing happens. And so what we're facing now is we're facing a world that radically needs redesign. And as a designer, this is very exciting to me, of course, because I'd like to participate in redesigning it and fixing it. And most of you listening are designers, so why aren't we jumping at the chance to redesign it? We also cannot solve our problems one building at a time. I've tried that. It doesn't really work, right? We can make the greenest building in the world, but that building is tied to a deep network of infrastructure that is also inefficient and doesn't really work very well. So we can't just change it one building at a time. We have to change and redesign everything. And the amount that we as a species are about to build is overwhelming. We're about to build the equivalent of New York City every 5 weeks for the next 40 years. And so the world's entire building stock is going to double by 2060. And so if we continue building it the way that we have been building it, we're going to completely destroy the climate in the process. And countries such as China are so massive and so big that they're contributing to this devastation, right? China used more cement in 2 years than the United States did throughout the entire 20th century. So just the sheer scale of what they're building and doing over there is crazy. And so oftentimes I kind of feel like this kid. I kind of feel like we're just swinging along and not looking over our shoulder to see the real devastation that's behind us. And as a result, this is where we are. We're here. And the decisions that we make today, really in the next 18 months, are going to determine which of these 4 futures are we going to end up with. And all 4 are bad, but there's bad and much, much, much worse. And so we're fighting just to keep the future not that bad, basically. But either way, you're going to see changes in the world and how we do things. So I kind of feel like that we're just little happy little dinosaurs, completely aware of what's coming for us. I was reading a book by Jim Collins called Good to Great. And in it, he talks about the 5 most brutal facts that are facing us today. And this is a great real exercise for you to do. And so I want to show you what I came up with. The 5 most brutal facts facing us are, first, that climate change, by its very necessity, is going to drive a price on carbon. And as soon as there is, it's going to transform how we look at cars, buildings, and infrastructure overnight. Number 2, that because of the climate crisis, liability is going to make entire regions uninsurable. And by regions, I mean both geographic regions and also entire industries. And you won't be able to build them anymore. Number 3, that concrete is such a problem, and we still do not have a viable low carbon solution for it. And yet it's very hard to build anything without concrete. Number 4 is that just our sheer demand for materials and stuff and all that building will not be able to be supplied by natural resources. We're going to have to start growing materials, what we call engineered living materials or bio-based materials. There's no way that we can meet all of our demand just using the normal stock of what we already have. And finally, number 5, that we need technology, and we need it in a way that we've never deployed it before to speed construction and scale construction and reduce cost at the same time. These are my 5 most brutal facts, and this is what I'm operating under. And these brutal facts are essentially determining what we're doing as a company and what I'm doing as an architect. And so to that end, we're really targeting to make every project as efficient as possible, target net zero energy on every project, use every tool in our toolbox to do that. We're measuring everything measurable. We're doing it now. We can't wait. And we're trying to deploy natural solutions everywhere we can. Now, we don't always succeed at this, but these six really, challenges, for lack of a better word, these six challenges are what we're trying to do on every single project, and you need to do the same. And I hate to be the one to break this to you, but we really need to radically transform how we build our buildings. Because in truth, the construction industry has not really embraced technology in any meaningful way. Compared to other industries, the construction industry still has no real data, no real insights, no real productivity gains. In fact, it's the only industry that hasn't really boosted in productivity, unlike everything else. We're still not automating or prefabricating anything really to any sort of scale. So the construction industry is terrible and has underperformed, and we need to change it. And we need to do it now because we need to cut our carbon down to 0 by 2050. And most of those cuts need to occur by 2030, in the next 8.5 years. So we can't wait till 2049 and suddenly make some cuts. We need to do most of the cutting today. So there is no time. Basically, every 2050 plan is a today plan, as we tell our clients. So any client that we have that has a 2040 plan or a 2050 plan, we tell them, pull that off the shelf, dust it off, and start implementing it now. Because of the time value of carbon, we can't wait for you to get comfortable. You need to start doing it now. The other challenge that we're having is that any time that we're talking about demolishing an existing building, building one of those glass box buildings, or we're not targeting net zero, anytime that we're doing that, really, that's a form of climate denial. And I hate to say it, but it's true, right? Anytime we're doing these three things, it's essentially ignoring the reality that is facing us. And that's a form of climate denial. And I struggle with this as an architect, obviously. But the thing that gives me hope is that I realize that we changed our planet's climate by accident. So imagine what we could actually do if we tried, right? Imagine what we could do if we really put our minds to it. And so sustainability is the ultimate opportunity. Sustainability doesn't cost you money. It pays for itself. It makes you money. Everything that I offer in the buildings makes for a better building and has a payback, which means that if we can start to measure these paybacks and we change what we start to measure, we can really change the world. Look at how we normally measure buildings, right? Normally it's the cost per square foot or square meter in Italy, the revenue it generates, maybe the ROI and payback, but we're ignoring certain things about sustainability, right? How should we measure the success of a building? Shouldn't it be in the patient recovery times or the amount of stress that we reduce or the way that we're able to retain staff? Shouldn't we also measure success by the amount of energy it creates or the amount of carbon it pulls out of the air or maybe the biodiversity that it produces? So what we do with our clients is we focus on these pain points, these things that they're struggling with, these things they're spending money on, and those become the opening for innovation. In fact, that phrase, what are you really sick of? That is the question where innovation begins. And that's the process we engage them in. So I don't start by selling them on, solar panels. What I start is by laying out a vision. And I say something like, what if this was the healthiest hospital in the country? What if this was the greenest school in the country? What would that look like? What would that mean to you? What would that be worth to you? And as a result of this process, we now have dozens of projects that we're doing where we're building the healthiest building they've ever done or the greenest building they've ever done. And these are all over the United States. This is Ohlone College. This is in California. It's the first net zero community college in the state, LEED Platinum, but also the greenest building they've ever done. This is on Caltech's campus. This is under design now. This is the Resnick Center. It'll be the greenest building on campus and the greenest project they've ever done. This is University of Florida Student Health Center. It's the healthiest building they've ever done and the greenest building they've ever done. And it's transforming how they're looking at all the buildings on campus. This is University of Illinois, Illini Hall. This is the greenest building they've ever done. And it's across from that beautiful building on the left. That's Altgeld Hall. That's an 1834 building that we're remodeling, which will be the second greenest building we've ever done. The way that we do this is we look at these 6 classes of chemicals and we look at the products that those chemicals show up in, and we really work to eliminate those chemicals. And it takes, a fair amount of work, but that's okay. We also have a different palette than you might be used to seeing. These are all bio-based, zero carbon and carbon sequestering materials. And we're trying to expand this palette as much as possible, really. These are the tools that we use, and I'm showing you so you can use them too. Most of them are free. But Mindful Materials is probably the best place to start if you don't know where to begin. We also use Tally and EC3 to measure the embodied carbon of the buildings. But all of this is really leading to an inevitable conclusion, which is ultimately we want to build the way nature does, because nature is able to create structures like this. And so it really poses the question, what if the building was actually alive? What if the materials were bio-based? What if they were real? What if we could grow a building? What would that look like? What would that mean? And there's an army of designers around the world that are working on this very problem. And what's making it all possible is really DNA. That for the first time in human history, we know how a zebra gets its stripes. We know how plants heal themselves. We know how a firefly glows. And it's all from a catalog of DNA that makes it all possible. And we understand DNA now more than we did even just 10 years ago. So we could grow our own buildings. And imagine what that would mean. Instead of the normal construction of using CO2 as a waste product, we could use CO2 as a building block. Instead of building it in layers, right, of structure and then skin and then insulation and then on and on and on, we could grow it all together the same way that you and I grew, right? Instead of painting the surface, we could have the pigment come from within, and we could even change colors based on mood or time of year. And when you pull a hook out of the wall could heal the same way your skin does, the same way a leaf does. In fact, the entire surface could absorb VOCs and CO2 and make the air cleaner because it's all bio-based. We could even bake the building code itself into the DNA of what we grow. So if you grew a stair, the stair would automatically meet code. You wouldn't need building inspectors anymore. Imagine that. And this could really radically change that paradigm from cut, slash, and burn, which we've been doing for 200 years, to a new paradigm of grow, regenerate, and breathe. And it's all made possible really by understanding that nature is the ultimate builder. That nature has plenty of builders that are building zero carbon buildings right now, if we just open our eyes to it and stop being so arrogant about it, right? There are millions of species that are building incredible things that are way better than anything I can come up with. And so really, we need to learn to see nature as the ultimate technology. So let's build our buildings by growing them. Let's radically transform how we're doing this. And we're just scratching the surface of how we're doing this. Sometimes we do it with 3D printing, where we use nozzles to additively create things. This is out of mixture of mud and cement. Sometimes we use prefabrication or CNC milling to make complex shapes that we couldn't possibly do in the field. We're now starting to deploy automation and robots to assemble these buildings with a precision that we never thought possible. And we're building zero carbon buildings using pretty basic technologies like mass timber, right? To build green zero carbon buildings that are beautiful and strong and biophilic in nature. And this is the vision that I have for Italy. I lived in Rome for a year and I loved it, and it changed my life. And I think about it probably every single day. And this is probably one of my favorite buildings. And when I arrived in Italy, the very first thing I did was I threw my bags down, and I was exhausted and jet lagged, but I threw my bags down and I ran to the Pantheon. And I just wanted to see it so badly. And I remember walking in, I was overheated from running and I was kind of sweaty, and I went through the columns into the inside, and it's kind of chilly in there, as you know, and my eyes were adjusting to the light, and I see the giant oculus and the light coming down, and it was transformative. And what I didn't know then, but I know now, is that too was a zero carbon building. It was a concrete made from volcanic ash with no rebar in it that's still standing 2,000 years later. So maybe we already knew how to do this all along and we just forgot. So thank you for listening to me. Thank you for talking to me. Hopefully this has opened your eyes a little bit to the possibilities. But if we start to build these zero carbon buildings and build them the way nature does, wouldn't that really be the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow? And ultimately, wouldn't that make everybody happy? Okay, thank you. Thank you for listening. And now I'm happy to have a conversation with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for such an inspiring talk, and a lot of the things you have been showing to us. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions about that. But so again, you can put your questions in the chat behind the YouTube or Facebook page, and I repeat this in Italian as well. Potete mettere le domande anche in italiano nelle chat, che poi le traduciamo, non c'è problema, e quindi fateci tutte le domande che volete fare a Eric. I start with one question, Eric. What you've been showing us seems really something that we should have been thinking all along, right? So why why we forgot a lot of these things? How are people receiving your ideas? How are you? I mean, I know you give a lot of talks and you do a lot of conversation, and we are very worried sometimes that a lot of the conversation about the climate crisis are really focusing on the crisis part, right? On the looming situation. How are people receiving your idea and inspiration? How they are reacting?
Well, I think I've learned over the years how to deliver the message in a way that doesn't make people feel guilty or scare them, right? I don't believe guilt is any way to really make people want to be environmentalists. I think the way you do it is you can highlight the problem, but you need to offer the solution at the same time. So that's what I'm doing is I'm coming in saying, let's map out your problems and let's find solutions for them. So it's pretty well received. The main thing that always comes up is this idea of cost. But what I've discovered is that cost is not usually the problem, because at the same time that they'll be talking to me about, well, how much is a green building going to cost? In the same breath that they're complaining, about the cost, they're also then turning their head and saying, hey, where are we with that $30 million parking garage? Are we done with that? So we have no trouble paying for the things that we think we want, right? We subsidize parking all the time. We subsidize this fossil fuel dependent way of life all the time. We never question it. And I'm really just pointing that out to a lot of clients and showing the absurdity of it. I think a lot of our decisions are made based on fear, right? Fear of the unknown, fear of having never done something before. And the good news is that because I've been dabbling with this for 30 years now, I've gotten to do a lot of this stuff, and I know the pitfalls and dangers. So when I hear their fear and I can sense it on them, I really just kind of address it head on and say, look, I know what you're concerned about. I know what you're worried about. I know what you're afraid of. Let's talk about those things. So I think that's the way to make profound change, is really just to address this head on. And to me, it's all a possibility, right? Buildings are not that great to begin with. So what are we holding on to? And I'm offering something that's, better. So, why wouldn't we try it?
Right. So here we're talking about your potential or real clients, right? But I'm sure you've been talking to lots of different people about these ideas and these possibilities. I'm thinking about, I don't know, the policymakers. I'm talking about students or future architects and so on, right? Have you seen any change in the last few years? I mean, have you seen a growing awareness, or beside the awareness about the climate problem, awareness of what we can actually do?
Yeah, there's been incremental change for the last 50 years. The change isn't the problem; it's the rate of change is the problem. People are slow to change. They're slow to adapt, and oftentimes they're reluctant to move at the speed that I'd like them to. And so what we typically see is we see an adoption curve that kind of looks like this. It starts out slow, and they want to kind of get used to the idea, and then suddenly once they realize it, then it goes pretty quick. But there's been nonstop change. I think the real difference is that virtually everyone on Earth has now experienced the climate crisis. Virtually everyone on Earth has seen firsthand the effects of a warmer, wetter world with stronger storms and more unpredictable weather and wildfires and air quality issues and so on and so forth. So this is not abstract anymore. This is reality that we're living in. And I think that's probably changed the conversation more than anything. And because of that, you've seen a quarter of the Fortune 500 companies have committed to carbon neutrality. Virtually all of them have committed to some sort of sustainability plan around net zero energy. I really see this change as inevitable. I didn't think it would take this long, but sometimes human beings like to wait until the last possible minute to make change. And I guess that's what we're doing. But I'm ever hopeful.
Right. So there are already questions coming in for you, Eric.
Oh, okay.
And okay, I will read them in a second. I just have another question that comes from your last slide about the Pantheon. So of course, we're talking to you here from Italy. Italy is quite an old country, and we have a lot of old buildings. We know that, of course, a lot of buildings have been built in the centuries, but also a lot of buildings have been built in the last 40, 50, 60 years, right? So when we had already maybe forgotten how to build in a sense, in a more balanced way with the environment, and when we focused a lot in building a lot of ugly, I have to say, concrete buildings. So you're suggesting that we should really look at not so much at how we should adjust building, but we should really change completely, the paradigm of how we build things, right? But do you have any? I'm sure you have a lot of perspective also because you know our country and countries like ours. How can we face that? Because of course, in the case of a country like Italy, there is also a lot of focus at the moment on not so much build something new, but try to make the best what we can, right? About what we have already. What's your take on that?
Well, Italy's a special case because you have 26 centuries of history in front of you, and you don't maintain a culture of 26 centuries of history without understanding really change and how to embrace change. What strikes me about Italy is, on the one hand, they're very old buildings, but they have new modern interiors, right? They mix the old and the new in a way that Americans never quite got. And we're slowly getting there. And they're able to balance the goal to preserve culture with the need for new functions and new safety requirements and so forth. So you can't just it can't be as easy as well, we're going to put solar panels in every building. A lot of those buildings are too old and weak to even handle that. But what it could be is a discussion around the infrastructure that feeds those buildings. It could be a discussion around understanding how to combine the old and the new in a much more meaningful way that I don't think we could pull off here in the United States, but the Italians, I think, would celebrate. It could also just be a celebration of the joy of being Italian, and so maybe it's not on the buildings, but it could fill the streets, right? So you could imagine the streets just filled with technology that is creating canopies, but they're solar powered, or an edible landscape that as you walk along, it's all healthy and organic and biophilic, but you could also take a little snack at the same time. So there's no shortage of ideas. The real question is there the political will to implement these changes, right? We can't stay stuck in the past. We can't have the future that I think we all grew up thinking that we were going to have of just more and more consumption. There has to be this third option. Right. And so that's to me, it's a wonderful opportunity facing both Italy and the entire EU of, well, how do you move into this new century, this climate smart century, in a meaningful way and take responsibility for the impacts that we have.
Right. That's a big challenge, and we obviously hope that it will be embraced by the communities and, of course, the people who lead or decide for all of us. So, but I go to the questions because there are already many, and I don't want to leave them on the side. So, Puchol Architects says, "Hi Eric, thank you for such an inspiring presentation. The idea of growing a building sounds great, but do we have any actual example of this being possible? What would be its conceptualization?" I would like to put this together with a question from Stefania, which is on the same way. Stefania Pensabene says, "I have seen a presentation from Eric suggesting one day we will literally grow houses around the scaffold in a way similar to what plants do. Is this really becoming real? And when might we see something like this?" So yeah, there are like two questions trying to see how distant are we, or are there already examples? And
well, let's address the second one first. So the way nature builds is there's a number of ways that nature does it. The way it typically does larger things is it builds them around what's called a scaffold. And there are thousands of different varieties of a scaffold. You are a scaffold. I'm a scaffold, right? Where we have a skeleton inside of us, right? It's in here. And then bone and tissue and muscle all grew kind of at the same time and formed around it. And so we have an internal structure that's draped in other things. But nature does this in all sorts of ways. An apple is is really just a scaffold with apple DNA woven through it. And in this case, it's cellulose. But a tree is really just a giant scaffold with tree DNA woven through it. So what we have is we have an army of biologists called synthetic biologists that are essentially looking at ways to use a natural scaffold that we either grow or 3D print and then inject DNA into it. And right now we're able to do things like this. So this is mushrooms, mycelium. So it's a fungus that was grown into a brick, and it's, where is it? A cute little brick.
Yeah.
But it's, it's natural, and you could eat it. It wouldn't taste very good, but you could technically eat it. But it's a healthy zero carbon material. And so we're just scratching the surface of that. But don't discount the fact that nature is doing every single day what we're doing. So nature is the proof of concept that it can be done. We just need to figure out how to do it. And nature is able to do it without heat, without fire, without energy, right? It's able to, it's creating amazing shapes in underwater in cold temperatures. So nature has succeeded in doing what we're trying to do. That's the good news. So it's very much possible. But the challenge that we're having is actually, there's a few. One is scale. Buildings are big, and growing something that big, we don't quite know how to do it yet. We're able to grow, small things, but we're just getting started. Right. 5 years ago, I started working with the X Prize Foundation on this idea of what if we could grow a wall, and it could grow to a very specific dimension. And it really was all about how do you deploy a scaffold at scale quickly. Because normally it might take nature 10 years to grow an 8 foot by 8 foot wall. We don't really have that kind of time. Instead, how do we grow them quickly? And mushrooms are one of the keys of how to do that, because mushrooms are able to grow big things very, very quickly. Bamboo is another. It's able to grow 3 feet in a day. So if we start to tap into the DNA of various biological elements, maybe we can figure out how to deploy a very quick scaffold quickly. But there's a lot of people working on this in very interesting ways. And really the ultimate what we're after is being able to grow important things like organs, right? Grow people a new liver or kidney or something. But in the meantime, let's grow bricks, let's grow walls, let's grow entire buildings.
Right. So that's also probably answering the other question. The idea of growing a building sounds great, but do we have any actual example of this being possible, which is what you just addressed? And what would be its conceptualization, which I think it's a very interesting point, right? So we're still,
I think we've also kind of laid out this idyllic timeline. And what I think one of the in-between technologies would be is that maybe we build the traditional building structure, but all of the walls and all the infill would be grown. So you might build the normal traditional structure out of steel or concrete or mass timber, but maybe you grow all the infill panels that grow in between. So we'd create an artificial scaffold, like we talked about, but fill it in, and maybe that's a way that we can accelerate it. And we're playing now with 3D printing. We're playing now with automated CNC milling and things like that, but it's not the same as biology that can grow really complex, intricate shapes that we can't build on our own.
Right. Okay, and then there is a question from Giulio Orsinger. He says, you have presented the vision, I'm translating from Italian, so I hope I get it correct. You presented a vision to change the way we build buildings, but also the actual city building requires a new vision. So, which is not only focusing on the materials, right? So what's your vision for a full city, for a big city, for a real city?
I don't think my vision for a city is any different than what's been talked about for the last century, right? The city as a living organism with inflows and outflows and inputs and outputs. But if we start to really embrace this paradigm of nature as the ultimate designer, and we see city as really a complex organism that we've assembled, then that starts to really change how we look at it. So instead of dumping in more fossil fuels and getting out pollution, which causes a lot of other problems, instead, we can look at it much more as a holistic organism. The layout of the city, I think we've already experimented as humans. We've already experimented with various layouts of what works and what doesn't. And what I do know is that this car-centric experiment doesn't work, right? This idea that we were going to redesign the entire city around the car first and people last is a failed experiment. And you see it in its excess in American suburbs, right? Where those cities are so new that we design them first with the car in mind. It's a little different in, take a city like, I'm thinking of like Siena, Italy, right? That clearly predates the car, and the car was forced to adapt to it. But, you take a city like Houston in the United States, well, that's the other way around. The car was thought of first and everything else was built around it. So you get these awful wide streets that feel very devoid of humanity. That's not a place that's fit for people, and especially children. So really, I think it starts with us admitting that this car-centric culture has failed, and we need to find a better way to do it. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have cars. It just means that the cars shouldn't be the priority. They shouldn't be the first thing. People should be the priority, right? And that should be our ultimate design guideline. Let's make a place that's safe for children to play first. That's our first design brief, and then everything else flows from that.
Right. I think this kind of idea is also what's behind a lot of the efforts in some of the Italian cities, for example, to have city centers that are car-free, and at least for part of the week, if not every day, but like to have like spaces where people can actually be around in a safe way and have a different way of moving from one place to another. So
imagine, whenever you go to Venezia, a lot of people will say this to me, where they've been there for 3 days and they just now realizing that they haven't seen a car in 3 days because they've just been walking. They completely forgot about it. That to me is a great example of we don't need the car, right? We can easily get around if we design the right transport systems for them and the right streets for them.
Right. So there is another question, which is from Aphrodite Lioliu. And she says, he says, thank you for the excellent presentation. One question though. When it comes to cost, build or maintenance, what are the differences? Are there any ecosystem services delivered by circular buildings apart from being zero or no, from being no zero construction?
So it's a great question because it really highlights something that we've been working on very hard, which is redefining cost. Right? This is something that I feel like I spend a lot of time doing with clients. So, for example, most buildings use a very traditional heating and cooling system. Lots of ductwork, lots of energy, and it pumps hot air or cold air all throughout the building. It works, but it has problems. It creates allergies, it creates dust. If someone's sick, it can spread viruses. We've now seen COVID can spread through the ventilation system. But we do it because we've always done it that way, so we think, and so we just keep putting it into more and more buildings. What sustainability is really looking to do is say, well, wait a minute, there are better systems out there. What if we used a radiant heating system or a radiant cooling system? We wouldn't blow dust on people. We wouldn't blow viruses on people. And when we calculate the payback, we can see that the radiant system is a little more than the traditional system, but it pays for itself in 3 to 5 years. It has an acoustical benefit. It has an air quality benefit. People feel more comfortable with it. And so what we've been doing is we've been calculating this full payback, the upfront cost, the maintenance cost, the repair cost, the replacement cost, the operational cost, the benefits it brings. And we've been stacking all those together, and you start to see that the sustainability systems are here and the traditional systems are here. And we're using this to help the owner make very informed decisions around their buildings. So I'm not asking for charity. I'm not asking do this because it's the right thing to do or do this because climate change is bad. What I'm essentially saying is, look, a greener building is a better building. You're just not measuring it correctly. And so the cost to build it, the cost to maintain it, all of those are important. And we're showing alternative, better ways to do that. It just is a measure of measuring it, right? And if you think about it, the most valuable part of any building is not the building. The most expensive and valuable part of any building are the people inside of it. So if I can build a building that improves, worker happiness, if I can build a building that reduces sick days, if I can build a building that boosts student test scores, if I can build a hospital that improves patient recovery times, all of those things also have a value. And so what I'm advocating for is let's build those desirable outcomes into the building. Let's measure those things and make sure we're doing them, and then let's calculate those paybacks as well. And if we start to do that, we can really start to see that the way we've been building is frankly stupid, and we've been building for 200 years, kind of ignoring what's right in front of us, which is that we need to design for people first and those outcomes. And if we do that, we'll receive a wealth and abundance of benefit from it.
Right. Connected to this, Eric, do you find, or do you have any experience of, let's say, policymakers or city governments or public institutions who are sensible and responsive to this new type of to this kind of cultural change? It's a huge cultural shift. We're still discussing, for example, in this country in these days, the fact that the rules to get funding to make big works in the cities and for the country, for the reconstruction or this transition that we're all facing, might still be based on the lower price. So it's not so much changing the indicators or changing the culture. That still has to come into the way we design, for example, our way of defining a process like an industrial process or a building process. So have you found, or can you share experiences of city governments or regional governments who are actually sensible to this and are looking for a different way of evaluating the value of buildings? Or it's still too early?
No, there are wonderful examples throughout the entire world. But they're little dots, they're little lights, a constellation of amazing things. I'm thinking of how Denmark said, we just want to get rid of homelessness, so let's just house everybody, and the money that we spend doing that will save us money over what homelessness was costing us in terms of blight and social network programs. So just eradicated homelessness. And I was raised with this idea that to eat while other people go hungry is a shame, right? It's one of the worst things you can do. And so that mentality of knowing that people are suffering when we have the ability to fix it means that we need to take action to do it. And so I think this is our opportunity, right? The entire world went through this awful thing. We lost millions of people. And so this pandemic should be a portal into rethinking how we do everything. To me, the best policy example I can think of is there's a policy that you have that we do not have in the United States. I wish that we had it here in the United States, and it's called the precautionary principle. And the precautionary principle basically says, we're going to assume that something is bad unless you prove otherwise, right? So if you introduce a new chemical, we're going to assume it's bad until you show me otherwise. In other words, it changes the paradigm from, we're not going to just assume everything's fine. You need to demonstrate that it's not going to hurt anybody. Yeah. And we do not have that in the United States. In the United States, we have this idea that everything is innocent until proven guilty. And we take that to the absurd degree. But this precautionary principle is a great foundation for how to look at environmental legislation and policy in a much more meaningful way. And so the reason I wrote the book on the circular economy was because I like that idea of having this very clear framework of how to address these problems. One of the things that people get surprised by is when I tell them that recycling is probably one of the last things that we should do, right? Instead, we need to redesign everything, right? If you look at the circular economy framework, recycling is at the bottom of the list of, it goes recycling and then burning it for energy. Those are the last two resorts that we go to. Way before that would be repurposing the material, closing those technological and biological nutrient loops, redesigning the product so that way it's more easily recycled or remade into something else. So I think there's a very a big rethinking that we should take with everything. And to me, I see that as the ultimate opportunity, right? We could redefine what normal should be and should have been all along for future generations. So that's very exciting.
Right. And on this, Alessandra Mazzai, she's asking, thank you, Eric, for the inspiring talk, of course. And you said, and I agree, that sustainability pays for itself, but also that we are just getting started. How long do you think we will have to wait for these concrete options, these innovative solutions to be available on the market and affordable for many people, institutions, for this vision to be applied widely? That's more or less what we were already saying, Eric, but I think I want to add to Alessandra's question this particular point, the affordability, because we discussed that, right? But there is a big issue that we are also facing, which is the really widening of the inequality, in terms of people who can afford to live in a secure place or in a safe place. I mean, and people who are actually living in bad houses or polluted areas and so on, right? And so what you just mentioned. I think it's a very important take on this. The fact that we should make these kind of technologies and these kind of opportunities available also for people who are not in a position to be able to afford themselves the cost of it, but more as a society or a collectivity. I don't know what you think about that. Yeah,
there's been this trend of high-end sustainability, right? That mostly rich, mostly white people can afford to buy Tesla and to put solar panels on their building and to insulate their building, and on and on and on. I think there's always going to be that faction of people that don't want to wait and want it now, and they can pat themselves on the back saying they're green, and that's fine. In some ways, those rich folks are creating an economy of scale to lower the price of a lot of these innovations for everybody else. But if we get through this entire process and we end up with more inequality, where sustainability or surviving climate change is only for the rich and everybody else, which is 99% of us, right? Everybody else is left on their own, then we have failed, right? We've missed a huge opportunity to really reimagine what it means to be sustainable. You can't have sustainability without equity. They need to go hand in hand. And it would be a huge mistake to wait for this magic expensive technology that's going to come along and save us. We already have everything we need to save us. Nobody wants to hear it. But we just need to stop emitting carbon. I almost feel like I feel like a fat guy who keeps going to doctors and saying, how do I get skinny? And the doctors are like, well, you need to eat right and exercise and eat vegetables. And like, no, I don't like that answer. And I keep going to different doctors, not liking what they're telling me, because they all keep telling me the same thing. You need to eat right and exercise and eat some more vegetables. And that's what I feel like we're doing that as a species. Right? We don't keep liking the advice. Well, here's the advice. We need to stop burning carbon. Right? Yeah. And that's it. I mean, it's really quite simple. We've known that solution all along. There are now viable, affordable solutions that are available to us. We're scared to try them because that's our nature. Our brains aren't wired for change like that, but we need to do it. And so in answer to Alessandra's question, when is it going to happen? It's going to happen when things get much worse. That's sadly what I think is going to happen. Generally, Winston Churchill had a very famous quote, and he said, I always count on Americans to do the right thing, but only after they've exhausted every other possible option. And I think that applies to everybody in a certain sense. Look at a country like Cuba. Cuba is an island. It's a literal island, and it's a metaphorical island, but it's an island. And when you go to Cuba, one of the first you notice is that all of the cars are from the 1950s. Why? Because they can't afford to bring in new cars all the time. So they're forced, for lack of a better word, to make the old cars keep running. And they've gotten very good at using bubble gum and Scotch tape to hold these cars together and keep them running. And they salvage parts, and they do it all because they are both a literal and metaphorical island. Well, we too are an island, just a much bigger island. We're 3 rocks away from the sun, floating on an island in space. And we haven't realized it yet, the same way that a small place like Cuba has realized it. And so it's going to take for us to realize those pain points of how utterly small and alone we are in the universe and how we need to find these solutions. But they're available to us. We just really need the will to do them.
Right. I just want to remind everybody who's listening and following us that we still have about 10 minutes with Eric. So shoot your question if you want to have a chance to interact with Eric. Ci sono ancora 10 minuti circa, quindi fate tutte le vostre domande. There is a question from Stefania. I'm going to put it onto you in a second, because before I want to ask you, Eric, how important it is. I mean, in this sort of, I don't even like to say visionary view, because in a way we need to make it real, not only visionary, right? But very concrete. In this road that you are proposing and taking, how important it is also the collaboration and the connection between different type of people, like you're an architect, and then you mention a lot like biologists and people who work in more in technology and automation and so on. So how important it is also to have a perception, very strong perception, and in building teams of people who are capable of putting together all of these different type of knowledge that are needed. It's like we don't have like, because in the past I'm thinking we had like still we had the technical skills, but then we have the big architect or the engineer, and they were all kind of working into their own discipline, right? I feel that now there is much more interconnection. I don't know if I'm wrong.
No, there definitely is, and we also have models of collaboration that we didn't fully understand just 10 years ago. So every net zero project that we do essentially follows what we call an integrated project delivery approach, where we bring in everybody that we need from the beginning, and we really coordinate. These are the issues facing us. These are the technical challenges we're facing, and we work together to do it. So more collaboration is the key. And more, you know, we just submitted on a project. It's a marine biology lab, but it's in this very vulnerable part of the state that gets hit by hurricanes. And what we proposed was a site that would heal the landscape. So it's designed to weather hurricanes, but also designed to clean the air and clean the water and clean the soil. And then what we proposed on the roof was, because it's a marine biology lab, was that we would grow lettuce and kale for the sea turtles that live there. And it's a very simple idea, of course, and nothing new, but it's just an approach. It's an approach to looking at the building as a full system that doesn't sit alone, but rather sits in a context of land and air and sea and different forces. And I think more than anything, that's really what it takes, is just kind of expanding our view and what we're able to do. But we have a biologist as part of the team. Why? Because she's a biologist and we need her. Like, she's got knowledge that we don't know. And it's been great. The more collaborative and the more experts we can bring in, the better. And hopefully everybody will learn from this experience, and a biologist will become a regular part of every project team.
Right. Yeah, I'm just wondering also in terms of the young people who might look into what they want to do as a career, and careers are changing. I know even only 20 years ago, lots of the jobs that we are doing now were not there 20 years ago, 20 or 30 years ago. And I'm thinking, for a biologist, maybe it wasn't the first thought, the idea of being part of a architectural sort of project, and instead that's also something that might happen, right? And so it's very interesting also from the point of view of who's actually choosing now the next step in terms of their career. So Stefania Pennsylvania was asking, do you think the Biden administration is going to really take action quickly on climate change? I mean, I know, Eric, you've been going, like you are based in the United States, but you are very much of a global person. No, because of course we're also looking a lot into this EU view on the strategy, like the next generation EU strategy, and the transition we are forces of the Green Deal and so on, and then we are all looking into the COP of the parties that's going to happen in Glasgow in November, where the Paris Agreement should be at least taken forward. So anyway, from your point of view, your perception is that at least your government at the moment might be really taking action quickly? The reason why, of course, we're asking that is also because the previous government didn't seem to be very much into the frame of acknowledging the risk and the need to act on climate crisis.
Well, the previous guy was a disaster, and let me just apologize to everybody listening for that. I'm in shock too, and it was a really terrible 4 years. So the Biden administration made climate change one of its 4 pillars, starting at the beginning. That was already a great sign. On Earth Day, just last month, they announced that they're going to cut carbon in half by 2030, which is in 8.5 years. That is a huge market signal, and the markets responded favorably to it. There's been more action in the last 3 months around climate change than there was certainly in the 3 years that preceded it, and probably in the 10 years that preceded that. I loved President Obama, but one of my biggest disappointments is that he didn't live up to his promise of climate change that he had said that he wanted, and we could and should have done a heck of a lot more. The world's also a very different place now in 2021 than it was in just 2016 or earlier. So the 5 hottest years on record have been the last 5 years. 2021 isn't done yet, and it's going to be one of the 5 hottest years on record. We already know that. This is just going to become something that we say now. So we're facing a very different world. Even the COP26 that's coming up, we're going in with the knowledge that we didn't have at COP21. I'd like to think that we keep learning from our mistakes. I don't know if we do, but the Biden administration has been taking action. It's going to continue to take action, and I'm excited to see that. I have a lot of friends that are working in the Biden administration that are doing great things and contributing to that. And if I was asked to help, I would gladly devote my time and efforts to helping as well. So we need to change, right? At the same time, we don't just have the United States. We have another thing called California. And California is its own, it's the 6th largest economy in the world. It's bigger than Canada in terms of population and GDP. And California is very much committed to this, right? They've already committed to carbon neutrality by 2045. There's been a number of policies in place. And there's an old saying that we have in the United States, which is, so goes California, so goes the nation. And so California has been leading the charge. The Biden administration is now playing catch up to that. And states like New York have also been doing some amazing things. So I'm hoping you're going to start to see some incredible things about climate change coming from my side of the ocean. Time will tell. We can't wait another 4 years to do nothing.
Oh, that's a fact. That's a fact. Okay, there is one question from Emanuele Bom. He says, considering that's more of a technical question for you.
Good.
Considering the albedo of building and growing ratio of city undeveloped areas, do you foresee white covers to reduce heat island effects of cities?
Oh my God, this is such an easy thing for every city to do, every building to do, is just cool themselves down with a light colored roof at least. If we do this in our cities, the temperature will drop by 20 degrees in the summertime. It'll save so much in terms of air conditioning and carbon emissions and peak load and lives. And and it's such a simple, stupid thing. I've been talking about albedo and heat island effect for 30 years now. I've written whole chapters about it. And yet I still have clients that are like, oh, really? Dark roofs get hot in the summer? It's like, it doesn't even occur to them. All you have to do is spend time on a roof. I've been on a lot of roofs, and all you have to do is spend time on a black roof in the summertime, and you'll realize, let's never do that again. And then it's not just the roofs, but the parking lots too. By the way, Emmanuel, one of the tricks that we do is whenever a client shows me an existing site, I'll basically put it into something like Photoshop, and I'll color in all the asphalt and concrete in black. And I'll do a figure ground drawing of it. And you'll see, a typical site is usually like 90% just covered in black asphalt concrete. And when you do this figure ground drawing, it's a very stark representation to the client to show them you've created an impervious hot site that you don't need to. And that really starts to open up the conversations around, the parking lot doesn't need to be asphalt. It can start to absorb groundwater. It can, use permeable pavers, porous pavement. There's a whole host of options that we have. One of my favorite ones are these little rings called grass pave that we stick in, that's strong enough for cars and trucks to drive on, but cools the site down beautifully. It's such an easy, stupid thing that every building should have a cool roof. And if you really want to go nuts, instead of a cool roof, you can have a green roof, which is even better. But yeah, we should just make it mandatory in every city.
Right.
And by the way, it doesn't cost anything, and it only saves you money, right? Picking a white roof versus a black roof costs you nothing, and it'll immediately cool your building and all the neighbors down at the same time.
Which shows that sometimes we really need just to think about a little bit of the effects of the choices we make, right? And not necessarily having to embrace big costs or big investment in that. So I think we got to the end of our conversation with Eric. We really had a lot of questions, and I'm very glad that we managed to touch a lot of points, Eric. Thank you so much for your time and for all of these inspiring ideas. And I hope we will see very soon also the reality of some of these ideas being turned like building that are growing and generated with all of these fantastic materials. So thank you so much for your time. And I also want to thank again the people who are following us. I want to remind everybody that you can submit your project about communication of the climate crisis and climate change by using the URL that you're seeing in the banner here, cmwc.award.eu. The deadline exactly, it's running here. The deadline is June 30th. And I also want to remind you that the next event, the next conversation will be on June 8th with the Pulitzer winner, the writer Kenneth Weiss on oceans, and he'll be in conversation with the journalist Veronica Fernandez. So I'll switch to Italian just to say buona serata a tutti, grazie. Ancora una volta vi ricordo questo indirizzo cmccaward.eu per sottomettere i vostri progetti di comunicazione. Il prossimo appuntamento l'8 di giugno alle 6. Eric, thank you so much and have a great day. Thank you. Bye.